Welcome to a craft tutorial with me, Brittany Bly from Pop Shop America. Today we're going to make colored paper completely from scratch. If you're just getting started with paper making, watch this video that's going to pop up right about here where we make all kinds of cool paper like this flower paper, and it really covers all of the beginners and the basics of paper making. We'll cover it a lot in this tutorial as well, but if you feel like you missed anything, it's always great to start at the beginning. So let's talk through our supplies with making colored paper. So we've got some pre-made paper pulp right here. I'll tell you a little bit more about that when we use it. We have a paper making mold. We have 3 different colors of tissue paper. We're going to make a couple of different colors. And so I really want you guys to understand those different transitions, how you combine them. So it's nice to have a few different colors when you're making colored paper. You can also add cool accents like glitter or confetti. We'll do that along the way as well. I have a couple of other containers. Again, because we're using separate colors, we need to keep those colors separate. So you're going to need some extra containers. You're going to need a really big dish like this or any kind of bowl. The important thing is it has to be bigger than the paper mold. You have to be able to scoop and submerge your paper mold in this larger container. So anything that's bigger than your paper mold will work just fine. We have some water. We have a sponge that we'll use at the end, and we also have a couple of towels because we're going to need a surface to let the paper dry. So that's everything you need. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take my paper pulp and I'm actually going to separate this into 3 different containers. I'm using 3 different colors, so I need 3 separate sections. We're going to have to keep all of our colors separate because otherwise if we combined them, we would end up with kind of a murky purple perhaps, or probably something more like brown. So I'm going to put about 1/3 of the paper pulp into each container. I think that this first container might have a little bit more than the others, so I'm just going to put some back. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just doing something that's close, so I'm just kind of rounding it to what looks good. So I think that's about 1/3 of the paper pulp in each container, and now we're going to start to add our colored paper. So I'm using this tissue paper right here. Now, any kind of pre-colored paper is going to be best for this. What you don't want to use is food dye or any kind of like colorant that you're adding directly to the paper pulp. I have seen tutorials that suggest doing that, but a lot of that color is going to fall right out, and it's going to fall right out on your drying surfaces, on your hands. Anytime you use it, it's just going to come right out. What you want to use is professionally colored paper like this tissue paper or some regular copy paper. Now, this paper pulp that I already have, the white part of the paper pulp, is just copy paper that I shredded just like I'm doing now. So I tear it into little tiny pieces, add a little bit of water, and then once it's soaked for a little while, an hour or 2, then I blend it until it's about the consistency of cake batter. We're going to do the same thing after we add our colored paper. The important part is that I want to keep white as the base, just because it's really going to make this color pop. It's going to give it a lot more weight and girth to the paper. We don't need to exclusively use just the colored paper. You can always add it to this white paper pulp. Now this is the last of the blue paper that I'm going to add right here. So I do want to add just a little bit more water. I want all of my paper to be moist. So there's not a set recipe or measurement for how much water you add to paper pulp when you're making it. You just need all of the paper to be moist, to be wet, and that's it. Now I'm going to go ahead and add my peach and my pink to these containers over here. Now the reason that I want to do that now instead of later is it'll just give it a little bit more time to soak. It'll be a little bit easier to blend, and now I kind of have a sense of where all my colors are, so I don't have to rethink it later. Now we're going to go ahead and blend our paper pulp. We always want to make sure before we blend it, we want to make sure that it soaks for at least an hour or two. Tissue paper breaks down really quickly, which makes that nice to work with. But if you're using copy paper for this, you might even want to let it soak overnight and then just pop it into a blender like this and just pulp it until it's the texture of cake batter. Once you have a nice fine texture in this paper pulp, you can go ahead and just open it up. Now, before you do anything else, take your blender, make sure that you get all of the paper pulp off of it into your container. Then take this and rinse it off. Remember, we are changing colors, so this blue that's right here is going to taint our other colors. So let's go ahead and make sure we remove it right now so we don't have any problems later. Now that I have this rinsed, I'm just going to set it to the side. And now we're going to make our paper pulp station for the first time. I'm going to fill this container, this large container, about halfway with water. And that should do the trick. Again, I'm just filling this about halfway. We need enough water to be able to submerge and scoop with our paper mold. And then we can just place our paper pulp directly into the water. So again, I'm starting with blue. And you want to just get as much of that paper pulp in there. And you can use your hands to swirl it around. Make sure that it's nice and even. Swirling this is always really helpful. This is going to help to make sure that as we scoop the paper pulp into the mold to actually make our paper, that it's going to be nice and even. So one thing we will always want to be careful about when we're making paper is we don't want paper that's thinner on one edge and thicker on another. We always want it to be nice and even throughout. So swirling it around will help with that. And actually, before I dip this mold, I'm going to go ahead and add some glitter just for fun. So we've got our blue pulp, and now I'm just going to add some sparkly glitter. And for that, I just add it right into the water. When you get your paper mold ready, make sure that you have the frame side up, the screen side down. And now all we're going to do is we're just going to dip it and scoop. And we want to make sure that we have an even coat of this blue paper pulp in our mold. Now you can even angle your mold as you scoop the paper pulp, and that's something that really helps to make sure that your paper is nice and even and that it's thick on both sides and not just thick in one area. Once you have your paper scooped to your liking, we're going to set this aside to dry. You definitely want to include some kind of towel, place it on something that's safe like this. Now we're going to need to clean this container so that we can prep for our second color. And we're going to need to clean our blender to prep for that second color. Now we have a fresh, clean dish. We have a fresh, clean blender. Let's go ahead and add our second color and blend that up and get started with our second color of paper. I'll start with the pink, just for fun. You can work in any order you like. You can use any color you like. And we're just repeating the same process as before. Now, once you get the texture that you like, we're going to repeat all of those steps that we did before with the blue. We're going to add water to this container, then add the paper pulp, then start that scooping process. But now it's starting to become a juggling act, right? Because we're working with a few different colors, we have a few different things going on. So let's go ahead and make a nice big place for our paper once we finish scooping it, once it's in the mold. And we'll actually remove it from the mold. So let's take our finished paper, put that to the side. We've got our sponge right here. All of these tools are things we're going to use along the way. But right now what we need to do is we need to take our drying cloths, open them up, make yourself a nice big space that's big enough for all of your paper to lay to dry. Make sure this is nice and flat. The flatter you get your drying cloths, the flatter your paper can be. So we just want to smooth it out with our hands. And then let's go ahead and start to remove this blue paper from the mold so that we can use it for our next color. So to do that, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take my sponge, I'm going to place it underneath the mold, and I'm just going to dab it. And what I want to do is I want to start that drying process. So just gently, I'm just placing that sponge underneath the mold, and I'm moving it around through the entire mold from edge to edge. And what this sponge is doing is it's starting to absorb the water from the paper. We're just starting that drying process. Once we do this for a few seconds, we can go ahead and open up the mold. Now gently flip it over, place it down towards the drying cloths. Take your sponge again and just press it again on that same side. So through the screen. We're not actually touching the paper itself, we're just touching the screen. And what we're doing is we're using the sponge to pull moisture away from the paper. So we just gently press it, and then over time you can just take that paper mold and lift it right up, and you see the paper stays on the drying cloths. And now we have our mold right here. Now, just like I cleaned the blender in between colors, I cleaned this container in between colors, I'm going to do the same thing with my paper mold. So you might notice that there's still a little bit of blue paper right here. I don't want that blue paper in my next color, so I'm going to rinse this off with just some fresh water and make sure there's not any paper smudges left. So now that our paper mold is nice and clean, I can just set that to the side. Make sure you have your sponge set to the side, and let's go ahead and start our Pulp Bath, our water bath, with our second color. Our second color is going to be a pink. And I'm actually going to make kind of an ombre paper, so this next one is going to be really fun. So I'm actually going to use two colors to make one piece. So again, we're just filling this tray about halfway, setting that water to the side, and let's add our pink pulp into the water. Once you have your pulp in the water, again, just use your hands to swirl it around. This is going to help the paper to come out more even in thickness across the entire piece. So just give it a little swirl. Take your paper mold, and now what I'm going to do, because I want to use two different colors, not one color, I'm not going to scoop it quite as many times. I can actually let it be thick. I can let this color kind of pool more in certain areas, and then I'm going to fill it in with that second color. And so what that's going to do is it's going to create this really kind of cool ombre effect. We're going to see some pink fibers in the paper, and we're going to see some peach fibers in the paper. So let's just give it a scoop, and again, we're going for something that's a little bit uneven. So it's basically the opposite of what I told you before, but we're doing it for a reason. So let's let it be nice and thick in certain areas. And you see how some of my screen is still open. There's no paper here, but this area is really thick. Over here is really thick, and that's exactly what we want. So let's go ahead and set this to the side, and then we'll finish it in just a minute. Now, of course, we're changing our colors again. So I'm going to clean this out one more time. I'm going to clean out my blender one more time so I can prep my peach, my final color. Now we've just pulped our final color. This might be my most favorite color in the world. And let's check it out and see how it looks. Yeah, it looks great. So I'm going to scoop, or kind of tap to get all of this extra pulp out. And let's add our water to our container one last time. Again, just filling it about halfway. And then we add our final color of paper pulp. Give it a nice swirl with our hands. Make sure that the paper pulp is nice and even inside of the water. You can dry off your hands if you like. Now let's grab our paper mold that we didn't quite finish. Now again, if you take a look, you can still see where there's not any paper in the mold right there. So that's definitely where I'm going to focus. Great. And then see how what we did is we kind of made it a little bit more even in texture across the entire surface, which is just perfect. So now we can just set it right here. We're done with our water bath. Now we're really just drying. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this off to the side because we're not going to use it anymore. I'm going to spread this out even further so that we have a little bit more room just to finish this drying process. So we'll just slide this into the middle. We just want to give ourselves a little bit more space, a little bit more room to work, because now we just need to let the paper dry. So just like we did before, take your sponge, place it underneath the mold, press it against the screen. So we're not touching the paper, we're just touching the screen, and we're just using gentle pressure to start to dry this paper. Once you've pulled some of the moisture away and you're feeling good about it, what we can do is just open up this frame, flip it so that the paper is facing the drying cloths and now the screen side is up. And we'll take our sponge one more time and just start to dab against the screen. So we're still not touching the paper. The sponge is only touching the screen, and we're continuing to wick the moisture away from the paper. Now, once you think it's dry enough, you can just grab the edge of the paper mold, and the paper should stay with the drying cloth and your mold will peel away. Now, if you ever have trouble with this, all you have to do is just use your finger to hold down the edge of the paper and then go from there. Now, our paper is finished. All we have to do is wait for it to dry. But there's a couple of different ways that we can speed up this process, which is really great. You know, in a situation like this where it's like we want to see the results, we want to see them right now. You can use a hair dryer. You could also use a heat gun. So all we need to do is wait for this paper to dry. That's going to take maybe 8 hours or overnight on its own. So we're just speeding up that process with a little bit of heat, a little bit of wind. All right, I've got my heat gun and I'm not afraid to use it. Just turn it on low and we're just going over the paper, kind of back and forth. These things are so powerful, so we really want to be careful. Less is more. I have it on low. And we just kind of hover it over the paper until it's dry. Now you can just touch your paper as you go to see if it's dry. Now, one quirk is that when you're working with a heat gun, you're likely going to have, you know, the top surface nice and dry, but underneath where it's touching the cloth will still be a little bit wet. So what I did is I flipped it over, and just the nature of flipping the paper, it does allow it to kind of bend and fold. Paper, when you let paper completely dry on its own, without using a hair dryer, without using a heat gun, it's going to gently adhere to this drying cloth, and that's going to keep it flat. But in this case, because we used the heat gun, it allowed it to curve. Now, the way that we can correct that is we can just set some heavy books on top of it for a couple of hours, and then it's going to lay perfectly flat and it's going to look amazing. Check out this gorgeous ombre between the peach and the pink. I love it, and both sides are so pretty, so that makes it really challenging to figure out which side you want to use. And this glitter in this blue one looks amazing. Hopefully you can see that sparkle. And check out how sparkly this side is. Now again, we haven't placed these underneath some books, so they are still just a little bit curved, but that is totally okay. Now we have our finished colored handmade paper. Now you can use this for stationery, letter writing, you can make it just for fun. You could also use these for greeting cards, gift tags. The sky's the limit. If you need more ideas of how to use your handmade paper or craft projects, make sure you like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. This is Pop Shop America, and happy crafting!